As I record this, it's May 2020, and everybody is feeling a little vulnerable. This is really just a prime time for donors and nonprofits to get taken advantage of. Can you trust that your donation is actually going to charity? Should you be suspicious of someone who seems overly excited to collect donations on your organization's behalf? How can your nonprofit keep tabs on who's using your name and your reputation? My guest today is ethics attorney Eric Cooperstein. We talked about some juicy lawyer scandals that relate to nonprofits and reflect on these topics and more. Stay tuned. Welcome to Charity Therapy, a podcast from Birkin Law about building better nonprofits. I'm your host, Jess Birkin.
My name is Eric Cooperstein. I have a small private practice in Minneapolis where I represent lawyers in ethics matters. All my clients are lawyers, and I mostly defend ethics complaints. I also give lawyers advice on issues and do some expert work. And then in all my spare time, I serve on several nonprofit boards.
Which is such a nice thing to have you around on those boards, I'm certain.
Well, there's a lot of nonprofits think, oh, I really want a lawyer on my board. And that's great. And lawyers are very proud of themselves for thinking that they think differently than everyone else. And they like to say that they're going to apply their training. And I think in some respects that really is true. I think particularly around strategic thinking, I think that good lawyers tend to be able to think about what's going to happen next and what's going to happen next after that thing that just happened next. And so that type of strategic thinking can often be helpful to a board. Sometimes people think that the lawyer is going to answer all their legal questions and serve as the attorney for the nonprofit, and that typically is not going to be true. And it's the lawyers who really have to know what their boundaries are and express them. So I agree it's good to be a lawyer on a board, but you have to be careful how you interact with the board on different issues.
You're preaching to the choir there, for sure. And you mentioned lawyers being strategic, and I think that the reason I said, oh, Eric, come do this episode with me is because we had, I saw on Twitter a couple of lawyers who were being a little too strategic in their practices, and that's, one of the things I wanted to talk about with you today was sort of this couple of cases that I saw about lawyers who got mixed up in some nonprofit dealings and, ended up having bad professional consequences for them. Are you up for talking about those today?
Yes, absolutely.
The first situation was an attorney in Rochester, New York, named Sherelle, or maybe it's Cheryl. Do you want to tell a little bit about what happened to this attorney?
Of course, I don't practice in New York, but this is a New York decision. And I would say that I don't think lawyers get in trouble that often for dealings with nonprofits. So that's why it might pop up on your radar. And she had a bunch of problems. She neglected some client matters. So she had a whole mess of things that were going on. But one of the things that they cited her for was that they said that she was making false or misleading statements on her law firm website. And the decision is pretty short, but what it says was that this lawyer used her law firm website, I'm quoting from the decision, to solicit donations to a fund entitled Law Firm Support Fund for Indigent Clients and Attorneys, and that any such donations would have been deposited into her bank account in her own name. Now, it's not clear from that's the end of the quote, but it's not clear from the way that's pled whether or not she said on the website that the funds were going into her own account or that she failed to say that the funds were going into her own account. I think it's probably the latter. Because if you were going to solicit funds as a lawyer on your website, you would want to tell people where the money was going, right? So if we were to assume the best about this lawyer, she got suspended for 3 years, and she didn't respond to the complaint either, and so the facts that were alleged end up being deemed true, even though the facts may have been way more complicated. But I have run into lawyers before who say, you know what, I have these clients who can't afford to hire me, and I'd like to raise money to represent these clients. I'd like to maybe solicit donations. And so there's a couple of issues with that. One is that, of course, a lawyer is not typically a 501c3 nonprofit,
No.
right? I mean, well, there are, legal aid, and locally here we have the Volunteer Lawyers Network. I mean, you can have a professional firm organized to practice law that is also a nonprofit, but that is not the way most law firms are set up. So that's the first issue is, so there would have to be some disclosure to folks that to the extent they're making donations to support, maybe the lawyer wants to do immigration work, for example. That's, it's been a big topic lately, and still is. And, so you have indigent clients. So the lawyer would like to raise money so they can fund this work because they can't just do everything for free. Well, you'd have to let people know that you're making a contribution towards something, but you're not making it toward a 501c3, so it's not tax deductible for the donor. So that'd be the lawyer's first obligation. And the second obligation would be, well, what's going to happen to that money? How's it going to be used? Is the money going to go into a trust account? Is it going to go into the lawyer's personal account? It's a little dicey because a lawyer who accepts fees before the work is done, as opposed to billing the client after the fact, a lawyer who accepts fees before the work is done needs to put that money in a trust account. And usually when you put money in a trust account, it's for a particular client, and so you know whose money it is, and if the matter ends, you give them back the money, and you know when you bill it. But if this is a general kind of collection, there's a problem in just dumping all that money in the trust account and then really not knowing whose money it is or when it's earned. So
Right.
the lawyer who wants to do that just has a couple of hurdles to get over. It actually would be much better if a lawyer wants to do pro bono work, or do low fee work, or however it is, raise money to get paid for representing poor people. It actually would be much better to find a nonprofit that also supports those same goals and set up a program through the nonprofit where people can contribute to the nonprofit, and then the nonprofit would kind of try to set the terms by which the lawyer is paid for doing certain types of work.
And I have to believe that exists in Rochester, New York. I mean, I didn't do that research, but there are so many public interest nonprofits around that there's got to be some of those in the state of New York that this attorney could have partnered with.
Oh, I agree, dude. But the world has changed so much. The idea that you can create, for example, GoFundMe sites or whatever other similar sites are out there to just raise money. So people will contribute a lot of money to these things, and sometimes the GoFundMe site is a 501c3 and sometimes not. I don't know what the obligations are of other people to disclose whether or not, but a lawyer certainly, I think, has an obligation. If the lawyer is going to be raising money, then the lawyer has really, I think, has an obligation to disclose exactly what's going on.
Right. And I mean, don't forget that the state's, attorney general or whatever agency is sort of in charge of policing charitable solicitation or fundraising in their state has an interest in people who are just holding it out as if they are raising money for charity when they're not. I mean, here in Minnesota, we have an attorney general's office that has very clear standards on whether you can be soliciting charitable donations or not. And I think part of the problem with this lawyer's website, and now I did try and look in the Wayback Machine to figure out what their website actually showed, but I just couldn't figure out what her law firm was.
Right.
There was just no way to find that out. So I couldn't see it exactly, but I think that it was basically saying like, donate money to, help me
keep my law firm afloat.
Yeah, which is
I actually, you know what? I think you could do that too. I think you could do that. I think you could say, you know what? I really want to represent poor immigrants, but I don't have paying customers. And so I just want you to give me donations so that I can keep doing what I'm doing. And I just think the lawyer needs some disclosures, such as this money, you're actually paying my salary. This money is going into my personal account, and the money I raise is going to be basically to pay my salary and to pay my office overhead. And this is not a charitable contribution because I'm not a charity, but if you want me to keep doing this good work, please send me money.
Yeah, it literally says the fund was called Law Firm Support Fund. So it's a law firm support fund for indigent clients and attorneys, which, yeah, exactly. It's like, hey, give me money so I can go do the good work for justice. But yeah, you have to explain to people that this is not a charity.
I think what a nonprofit has to think about if they want to get into this idea of, yes, that's what we want. We want lawyers to represent people. But, it could be any range of nonprofit that's doing good work. It could be a housing organization, and they occasionally run across somebody who's being evicted, and they need a lawyer. And when they refer the person to legal aid or someplace else, it turns out that person doesn't fit within those other organizations' guidelines. So they really want more control over it themselves. They want to be able to have lawyers themselves. Well, it can't be a lawyer who works for their organization, most probably. And of course, people should also know that the laws are different in all the states, right? So you really have to know something about your state laws. But there is a thing about an organization being deemed a professional firm to practice law. And so your ordinary nonprofit is not going to be organized that way. And so they can't have a lawyer on staff that then goes and represents other people. Some nonprofits do. It's a little bit hazy. In some places, the unauthorized practice of law statute doesn't apply to nonprofits because there's no pecuniary gain. But so that's the first thing they have to think about is okay, so they may or may not have a lawyer who's going to come on staff, but they're going to hire someone on a contract basis. And if they're going to do that, they have to have some idea of, well, how much are we going to pay and what are the guidelines? And they also have to know that they may not get any information about the representation after the lawyer is hired. A lawyer can be paid by a third party to represent someone, but that third party doesn't become the client. And the third party isn't entitled to any of the confidential information going on in the case. The client could authorize that, but so the nonprofit could be paying money to a lawyer, and they may not get a lot of information about what's going on unless the lawyer's client authorizes it.
Yeah,
So that's a big thing for nonprofits to think about.
Yeah, and I think there's actually like a nugget of a cool program idea here. And she just didn't go about it in the right way, because this sort of reminds me of there's an organization here in Minnesota that was just honored at the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits Conference with an Innovation Award, where they were sort of inspired by Philando Castile, who was shot by police officers here. And Philando had been, he's a Black man who had been stopped 49 times for minor traffic violations, just tail light out, blinkers not working, whatever. And so being inspired by this situation, that organization said, how can we provide these services so that cops can do something other than give a ticket? Like, can we actually give these people a micro grant so that they can just go get their car fixed? And
Right.
so what they did is they wrote a grant and they got funded, and then they basically they partnered with the police officers, and the police officers give out a voucher, and they have partner mechanics that are also like, okay, yes, we will take these vouchers and we know we will get paid X every time we get a voucher that has been given to us. So instead of writing a fix-it ticket, the officer says, here's a voucher, go get your tail light fixed. And the driver has the opportunity to get the service that they need, and the mechanic gets paid for that. Sherelle could have done something like that here.
Yeah, and that actually raises a very interesting point. I mean, that's another program a nonprofit could start, would be to help people who are waiting for their lawsuits to be completed. So lawyers cannot lend money to clients in connection with a case. They can advance court costs that may or may not be paid back later. If it's a poor person, they can pay the court costs and they don't have to be reimbursed. But they can't, for example, pay the client's rent or give the client gas money. And it may be that the lawyer is suing on behalf of the client for a big pot of money, but it's going to take 6 months or a year and a half or longer for that case to be completed. And in the meantime, there's some low settlement offer on the table, and the client is tempted to take it because they can't pay their rent. So the lawyer in some states could guarantee a loan, but the lawyer can't actually lend the client money or give the client money for the rent or for food or for gas. Like a microgrants program, you could have a nonprofit that tries to support people who are in litigation. Like if you have they have a civil rights case against the police department, you could have a program that sets up parameters for paying people's personal expenses, and that'd be a way of supporting the person who has a claim without either hiring the lawyer or paying the lawyer directly for anything.
Well, then I think that Sherelle was probably ultimately in that case trying to not rip people off, which is completely different than our other guy.
Right. Well, and just the last word about Cheryl is that, because I see that she neglected some cases and failed to keep clients informed and didn't cooperate in the discipline process, I get the sense that she was struggling in her practice, which is pretty common, was just looking for money to stay afloat.
Yeah.
And so did something and, maybe never even got very much money because they don't say in the decision that she ever got any money off of the deal. They're just saying it was on her website. So that's probably a pretty sad case of somebody who either couldn't make a go of it, could even have had depression or mental health issues, because oftentimes it's associated with neglect and not cooperating with a discipline investigation.
Yeah.
So we don't have to assume that she was an evil person.
Oh no, yeah. And she was just trying to make a go of it.
Right.
Unlike our other actor in our radio play here today, who managed to steal 1.4 million from the charity that he helped create. Now, this one was convoluted. I actually did try and pull on the string of this and try and figure out exactly what had happened here. So I'm going to give a little spiel here to explain what happened. Essentially, there was a charity called Fisher House Foundation. This was in Connecticut. And Fisher House Foundation is kind of like a Ronald McDonald House for military families. So if you have a veteran or a member of the military who's going through an extended medical issue, the Fisher House Foundation provides housing and services for their families while they are maybe at the VA for a long time. Along comes attorney Kevin, who helps found a friends group that was called Friends of Fisher House Connecticut, Inc. Kevin puts on his website very prominently all over their website that they are underwriting this charity. And when you go to the Friends of Fisher House website, it says right on the charity's website that they are underwritten by this law firm, which my poor law clerk, it boggled his mind what that even meant. And I had to laugh because I was like, I think it means nothing. It just sounds fancy. What did you think about all of that?
I think this person is just a thief.
I agree.
And he just has one particular way of trying to steal money. I have a long-standing joke in my practice about how lawyers screw up stealing money. So the rules of misappropriation, in my mind, there's two rules. The first rule is steal a lot of money. Because if you're going to get disbarred, no one wants to be disbarred for stealing $10,000. It's not enough money. So the first rule is steal a lot of money. Now, this lawyer managed to get the first rule right. He stole 1.4 million. Some people would consider that a lot of most people consider a lot of money. I don't know that it's enough to sacrifice your law license and your career over, but he was 67 already, so maybe he figured he didn't have long to go. But the second rule is, and this is the rule the lawyers almost always can't get right, is have an exit strategy. No exit strategy, right? So he gets caught, and now he's done. So he's just a thief. I don't think that, thieves make for amusing discussions, but ultimately they're not that instructive, at least for lawyers. In terms of nonprofits, a lesson is if a nonprofit finds somebody who seems eager to raise money for them in an odd way, maybe nonprofits need to Google themselves periodically to see where their name is coming up. Maybe there are some, we all have to apply a certain radar based on our life experiences to people who enter into our orbit, right? And sometimes, are just the way someone behaves. Someone goes, I recently had a client that we represented, and there's just, can't quite put my finger on it, but I just know, so people can't see on the podcast that I have hardly any hair left. So I've been doing this for a very long time, and there's just something about this person that I just said, there's a problem here. There's a mental health issue. And I'd asked, is there anything else? Do you always get so anxious over things like this? And it was a pretty serious situation, but somehow, so anyway, so I just thought there was something wrong. And I think we all have to develop that instinct. And it's harder when you're just out of college to have that instinct as opposed to when you've been working in the world for 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 years. But if you get that inkling like someone is really, they're too much of a volunteer or something, well, I don't know, but maybe nonprofits should check. I don't know, Jess, is this a problem that nonprofits have with people using their name to, do terrible things or raise or get money for themselves?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it raises a really interesting question for me about, did the national group know that this was happening? Because in the sort of news stories, it says that Kevin had started this chapter of the national org. Were they aware that this chapter existed? Were they even a chapter-based organization, or did this lawyer just sort of start a charity and call it the Friends Group? It's just, that part to me is very curious, because if I'm a national organization and somebody starts a chapter, some of the things that I'm going to want to control as the mothership are like, well, we need to have a charter agreement. We need to agree what your use of our logo and brand is going to be like. We need to know, that you're going to run your satellite in a way that reflects well on us. What's your obligation? Are you using our tax exemption? Are we under a group exemption with this chapter, or are they obligated to get their own tax exemption? Because if we're under a group exemption, we are risking ourselves for these little satellites, right? So it was very like, I wanted more information about, like, what was the relationship between the main organization and this little organization, because basically sounds like this guy Kevin didn't have a real board. It was basically just him, and he obviously had control over where the money went and was able to withdraw large sums of money, or maybe never even deposited them into a separate bank account. I don't know. So there's some questions to me, like, how are we supervising our satellite organizations, or what sort of responsibility does my main organization have to sort of like have a Google alert every time somebody uses our name somewhere? Like, I would want to know if somebody was out trying to raise $3 million for our cause, even just from a perspective of like, gee, I should go meet that person, even if
Right.
they were a
Right.
saint, right?
Well, and that's a good. I mean, you are, you're a big tech person, Jess. And I think, Google alerts are one useful way to figure out whether somebody's using your name, and that's, a free thing that anybody can do for any purpose. And so you can set up Google alerts for the name of your nonprofit and just see. And actually, I mean, it doesn't have to be only for negative reasons, right? A nonprofit might want to set up a Google alert to see when they're in the news as a nonprofit for good
Oh
reasons.
yeah,
Just see what they're,
absolutely.
there should be somebody, if you have, a number of staff people, there may be somebody who should be tracking when the organization is mentioned somewhere, and that feeds into their social media campaign, right? So um, using something like a Google alert could have multiple purposes to it.
Yeah, and I mean, it wouldn't have been hard to find, which makes me think that they knew, because, this was on the lawyer's website. This website I was able to find in the Wayback Machine, and I can post links in the show notes so people can take a look at this very bad website. In true lawyer website form, it's awful. But this lawyer had a couple different incarnations. So first it was Newman and Creed, and then that was in 2011, and then all the way through that time until 2017, when this lawyer was now Creed Law Firm, he had this on prominently displayed on the homepage, saying, we're the proud sponsors of this project. We are involved with this charity, which I just think is, for me, that's weird because I'm a professional, as far as I'm a lawyer and I'm a nonprofit professional. So it's just very strange to me that a law firm would have this on their website, but maybe it might not seem strange to other people, or it might seem like a good idea, um, to tout your charity involvement on your website, but I'm curious whether that's ethically a problem.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's a problem for lawyers to say what charities and nonprofits they're a part of, or what their favorite causes are, or who they give money to. Um, but I mean, I think nonprofit boards should know a lawyer, if a lawyer is soliciting contributions for a nonprofit, the lawyer shouldn't be putting that money into their business account. There's in fact also an argument the lawyer shouldn't be putting the money into their trust account either, because it's not for client matter. The way our rule is written in Minnesota, it says you should put funds in your trust account when they're associated with a representation. And so if you're simply on the board of a nonprofit, the money, the lawyer should not be collecting the money. The lawyer could collect checks made out to the nonprofit and then forward on those checks. Lawyers don't have any special status in terms of accepting contributions on behalf of a nonprofit. So if a lawyer is collecting the money and depositing it, well, even if the lawyer turned that money over to the nonprofit, I assume a lawyer is going to take the charitable deduction for all of that money, which wouldn't be appropriate either.
Right. Yeah, no, because the donor is no longer getting a deduction at that point.
It should be a red flag to people if a lawyer is saying, "Oh no, don't worry about it. I'll collect all this money." And then also, if the lawyer has any, lawyers there are quite a few rules for lawyers around conflicts of interest. So if the lawyer is representing the nonprofit or doing work for the nonprofit, probably the lawyer should disclose that before people start making contributions to the lawyer.
Yeah, the crazy thing to me is that, this guy didn't just solicit donations through a website. I mean, there were fundraising events at fairs and carnivals and supermarkets, a half marathon, a foot race. Like, there were just so many extensive fundraising efforts for this charity that it seems crazy to me that this one guy had enough control over it that he was able to siphon off $1.4 million. It just brings up a lot of questions in my mind around like nonprofit management and internal controls, and like, who else was responsible here that didn't notice that much money disappearing?
Well, yeah, I mean, at the point where someone's doing a fundraiser, I mean, that's a pretty public event. And so what was the nonprofit doing as far as figuring out whether money was being raised, what was being done with the money, and so forth?
Yeah.
Somebody was kind of asleep at the wheel.
There are some things that donors, like just people in the public, I think either we look at lawyers like respected professionals or the scourge of the earth. There's kind of like two stereotypes. And it's unfortunate that donors are not better educated about how to do the due diligence to make sure you're giving money to a good organization. And I think that's, a lot of times we see stuff in the news, and you're being asked for a donation, and it's really hard for people to understand when is it a good organization and when is it a bad organization. And maybe being affiliated with a law firm felt like it was more credible, but that's not one of the things I would point to for when you are looking to make a donation to a reputable charity.
Right. Yeah, it shouldn't matter whether there's a lawyer involved or not. I mean, so if you're going to go out raising your own money, you should make it easy for people to find the information. In fact, why not have a link on your website to GuideStar or to the Charities Review Council or the equivalent in your state? If you're a trustworthy organization, make it easy for people to figure that out. And, I mean, to the extent that other people are, if you're going to put your name on other things, I think you need to be really careful about that. But I think they probably need someone more like you, Jess, than they need me to help them figure out ways to present their legitimacy and make sure all their funding streams are handled properly.
Amen to that. Eric, thanks so much for being here today. It was really fun to have you, and any chance I get to have a conversation with you is always a good one.
It was great fun, and I'm happy to do it anytime.
All right, folks, that's our show. Be sure to follow me on Instagram or Twitter at Jess Birkin. We want to hear from you. Send us a message at our website, charitytherapy.show. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at birkinlaw.com/signup. Charity Therapy is a production of Birkin Law Office, PLLC. Our theme song is by Whalehawk. And remember, folks, this podcast is produced for your entertainment and is not a substitute for actual legal advice.